I think that there's an enduring myth that spiritual life is supposed to be easy. Nice necklace. Yeah, I think there's this, just like sometimes people say, if life is hard and they suffer, things don't go your way, sometimes it can be really petty stuff, like you stub your toe. Sometimes I'll stub my toe and I'll get angry at Krishna. Like I'm angry, somehow it's Krishna's fault that I kicked a rock. You guys ever have something like that happen? I mean, it's just ludicrous that somehow or other Krishna's supposed to change the laws of physics so that you can, kick rocks and not cut yourself or something like that. Or drop a weight on your foot and not hurt yourself. And it's somehow like the proof that God's evil or unloving, that you experience some difficulty as the just deserts of your own actions. Do you guys, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So, if you think about it, just objectively, it's just totally preposterous half the stuff we blame God for, or maybe even 80 or 90%. Stuff that just clearly, it's not like you got cancer and you got to go to some idea of karma from a past lifetime, or maybe even from this lifetime, where you get cancer and you're super upset at God, but you smoked a pack a day for 10 years and you get esophageal cancer 20 years down the road. And you're like, why? Why is this happening to me? So even sometimes the big stuff, you can directly trace out the cause of your suffering. It might take a couple of hoops you got to jump through. But for most of the stuff we get vexed by and disturbed by, it's 2 plus 2 stuff. You know what I mean? Like I ate the wrong thing for dinner and then I got the runs the next day or something like, it's that obvious. I went and hung out with a bunch of people who were sick and I got sick. I ate something which was, I ate too much and I got a stomach ache. So the first thing we need to do is just take responsibility for what's obviously our fault. How many of you always take responsibility for what's obviously your fault? I think that's probably fair. In fact, if you said that you always took responsibility for what was obviously your fault, I would say you were a liar. And probably you all know that I do that, so then everybody's being cool because they know my jam. I stub my toe and have to resist blaming Krishna, so I know all of you guys are tripped out about it. So the first thing would be just to obviously take responsibility for what's obviously your fault. And here's, it's so simple. Just think about it real quick. Let's say you had a small business, and you had employees in your small business, and they refused to take responsibility for the mistakes they made. Like they spilled oil all over the floor, and they blamed the container wasn't made right. Those large, what do you call them, boxes of oil, and they should make them better, and it's not my fault, or I had a tough day and that's why I spilled the oil and I shouldn't have to clean it up and somebody else should clean it up for me and I shouldn't have to take responsibility for being late because my life is hard and I got other stuff going on. Imagine if you were running a small business and you had employees like that. What would you do? Right? For sure. You have to go through the proper protocol. You have to write them up, or you have to give them a verbal warning and then write them up and then fire them. You don't technically have to do that, but it's usually good to have some kind of an employee manual and then follow it strictly. Usually it's an at-will situation in California, but even in an at-will situation, you want that double layer of protection, and so you want to follow the book and then you're good. But certainly, if people were messing stuff up in your place of business and it was clearly like just their fault. You had video evidence that it was their fault. And they try to blame you. Or how about if they try to get over on you? They want to do some kind of a workers' comp claim or some kind of whatever, I don't know, some kind of hazard thing, OSHA thing. And you were doing something wrong, they want to sue you, get over on you, make some money off of you. But you had video evidence that it was just 100% of fabrication. It was entirely their fault. How would you feel about that person? Right? You think, I don't want this person in my life. I think most of us are really bad employees in the small business of life. Krishna's our boss, and we're super bad employees. And you can think about the stuff you get petty about and you get bent out of shape about that you think is unfair. I was just talking to somebody today. I was just talking to Anandini. How bent out of shape she is. Because things aren't fair. But then I point out, well, if it was fair, then Narayan would have gotten 3 months off when you had the kid, which is totally the case in Switzerland and other socialist countries. And then she said, well, no, I carried the kid, so I deserve the time off. I said, well, you've also got the body for taking care of the kid. You got the big hips, put the kid on the hips, real easy. You got your breasts, real easy to feed the kid. You've made that bond from birth. You got to take the 3 months off, make a really good bond with your kid. But all of a sudden, the moment you're back at work, all of a sudden it's got to be 50-50. See how hard I got your back? I'm grateful to you, to both of you. And I'm also grateful to you. Got your back behind the scenes. Probably shouldn't be saying this on camera, but whatever. Everyone wants 50-50 when things don't favor them. Then all of a sudden it's like justice for you, mercy for me. Like I believe in justice and mercy. Justice for you, and I want the mercy for me. I deserve, because I'm special, because I'm sincere. Nobody really understands me. You guys know who John Dillinger is?
Yes.
He's a mass murderer criminal in the 20s, kind of during the heyday of Prohibition. I don't know if it's true or not, but I know a million John Dillingers. He had this like a deathbed type confession, and it was, nobody really ever understood me. I spent my whole life trying to do good, trying to help other people. But he was a cold-blooded sociopathic murderer who killed people for fun and just had a wanton disregard for human life. But when you talk to him about himself, he had this whole narrative. How sincere he was, and nobody understood him, and his life had been so hard. Do you guys ever feel like that? You got something in common with John Dillinger. Everybody thinks like that. Everybody thinks we're all a special snowflake. And we're sincere. And, people don't really get us. And we're really trying. But we don't analogously consider that probably everybody else in the world feels exactly the same way. We want it to be fair when we think fair favors us. Then when not fair favors us, we're usually a little more chill. Like Ross went to Restaurant Depot yesterday, and he was on his way home, and accidentally he bought a case of avocado, but they just only charged him for a bag of avocado. And I wasn't like, oh, you have to turn around and go back right now. Call Restaurant Depot. They mischarged us by $25. I didn't think that. I was like, whatever. I just didn't write in. You notice I didn't write in? I didn't want to be like, yeah, keep that money. But I saw you guys doing it, and I was just like, I saw it.
You didn't put a Giphy or anything.
Huh?
You didn't put a Giphy or anything like that.
I gave you nothing.
Yeah.
Right? We didn't even talk about it last night, right? So, but I wasn't like, oh my, but I mean, for sure when they mischarge me against me, I'm always like, hey, I call them up, hey, give me credit for next time. But somehow I haven't gotten around to doing that today for this one. Not like I'm not against it. I wasn't looking to rip off RD, but it happened. They ripped themselves off. What am I going to do? Pay $50 worth of gas to go back down there and return it? I'm storing it in my fridge. After a week of storing it in my fridge, it's mine. I paying the bill for storing it in my fridge, so it's mine. The work it'd take to get it back down there. I have all sorts of nifty ways of justifying what happened. You follow? You get it? You're all like me. So, first things first. We are lousy employees in the game of life, in the business of life. Krishna must be bummed. We're stubbing our toe and blaming him. Imagine if you had an employee that stubbed their toe and they blamed you. Or they were walking out to their car and they stubbed their toe, not like on something that you left, but just on the ground. They did one of these and rolled their toe, and they had a sandal on, they rolled their toe and got on the concrete and scraped the tip of their toe. And they're like, this is your fault. Why would you do that? I'm working so hard here. And they had that thought, and they said that to you. What would you think of that? Well, you think you're insane. What's wrong with you? Get away from me. So first things first. We just got to own the petty, obvious stuff we do wrong. It doesn't even take any math skills. It's just arithmetic. It's light. It's just adding numbers together. 3 plus 5 or something like that. Then the stuff that's a little more difficult to fathom, usually 80% of that stuff's your fault too, and you can figure that out. Maybe there's a certain percentage of life where you've got to start to trust in the idea of karma. And you've seen enough of it working where you can trace it out, and then you extend that. You extrapolate. You adduce that karma is a reasonable explanation for what's going on. I can see that, I do this and then I get that, and every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And, usually the way you get to karma is, honestly, if you want to really understand a lot of karma, there's 2 ways to get to it. One way is you experience karma enough in your life, and you can trace it out, and then you're able to extrapolate from that, even though cases where you can't trace it out, and understand the principle of it. That's one way, through adduction and extrapolation. And it's the best possible explanation, and you have enough evidence that it warrants it. The other way you get to believing in karma is it's actually the way I prefer. I think it's a stronger argument for believing in karma. Because I say that, somebody else can say, well, I didn't experience that. I don't see that. I see too many exceptions to the rule, and I have no reason to believe in karma. I believe in chaos. And you'd be hard pressed to make an argument to a person like that. Do you guys follow this? You follow it? Yeah? So you can say, I experience karma. The universe works where every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We find that in the physical world. And then I start to notice that in my own life. And quite often I can trace out where I am the architect of my own destiny. But then sometimes stuff happens where I can't trace it out. Congenital heart defects, epigenetics, whatever it might be. And so then, in that case, I'm able to extrapolate on my experience of cause and effect. And I'm able to believe, okay, there must be cause and effect. And I just can't quite see all the nuances of how it happens. Did you guys follow that? I think it's a reasonable argument. The problem is, what happens when you get an opponent and they say to you, yeah, I didn't experience that. There's a lot of things I see happening in the world where I don't believe there's a cause and effect. That is where it's your fault. It just seems like things are happening and you're a victim. And for every example you give, I'm going to give you a counterexample. And I believe in the laws of physics, but I don't believe in some sort of ethical laws of physics of cause and effect. Because it's one thing to believe in the physical law of cause and effect. It's another thing to then extrapolate from that and say there's an ethical law of cause and effect. That's a pretty big jump you just made, and I'm not making that jump with you. And whereas things in the physical world are demonstrable all the time and repeatable and they're scientific, your ethical jump, that there's an ethical law of cause and effect, has a lot less support for this, much more theoretical. You guys following the argument now? Seeing what that looks like? So I don't favor that argument, although I don't think it's totally unreasonable. The argument I favor is that you convince somebody that consciousness is not material. There has to be a source of consciousness. That source of consciousness is God. That deity, which is the source of everything, also becomes, and is conscious, would therefore be unlimitedly powerful. One aspect of power is goodness. Or there's a logos in the world, and therefore that also comes from that source, and therefore God is logical. And when we see the best things in the world, we find that those things, compassion and empathy and so on and so forth, love, is that going to stop at some point? Huh? Thank you. Let me start again. Consciousness is real, can't be explained materially. It's a non-material phenomenon. Everything has a source. That source now has to be conscious. Also has to be incredibly powerful. One element of power is goodness. Or when we look at the world and we see the best elements in the world, it's goodness, and therefore those things come from God. Or logic comes from God, which entails goodness. There's a few ways you can get to the goodness thing. And now I get to an all-good, all-powerful creator. And I say, what would the world look like if there were an all-good, all-powerful creator? And there would, in fact, be cause and effect. Because without such cause and effect, there'd be no rhyme or reason to the world. Everything would be chaotic. There'd be no way to learn. There'd be nothing you could depend on. In fact, when we look at the world that also came from that creator, it follows that, and therefore there would be naturally the ethical code of the world would also follow that, because both things come from a creator. So I prefer to argue for theism first, and then karma as derivative and natural for an all-good and all-powerful God, as opposed to trying to just get somebody to believe in karma because there's just too many ways that they can argue with you. Do you guys follow that? So first thing is we just take responsibility for what we're doing wrong, obviously. Then sometimes there's some stuff that's a little more tricky. We got to own that stuff too eventually. And however you get there, either through theism or through observing the world, eventually you may be able to extrapolate even when you can't quite trace out the cause and effect, and you might be able to just accept it based on principle. Then there's this idea people have that, like, if you're suffering or things aren't going your way, there's something wrong. But if you went to a prison, for example, and imagine you went to a prison and the prisoner was like, I really don't like how they made these cells. They got these bars and they lock the doors, and I can't get out whenever I want to, and I have limited access to the yard, and I can't leave when I want to, and there's this whole maze of doors and locks, and there's mean people in here, and I want to leave, and it's not set up for me to leave easily, and everything is so confined. What would you think if somebody at a prisoner, started critiquing the architect of the prison, that there was something wrong with them? You'd think they were an idiot. Because the whole purpose of the prison is to contain you and restrict you, to make you penitent. That's why it's called a penitentiary. To edify you, to rectify you, to teach you something, to punish you. It's punitive justice. So the fact that you don't like the prison and it curtails your movements and it's difficult for you, that's by design. Because you committed some crimes and you deserve to be in prison. You got some lessons to learn. So we wake up in this world and we assume this world's supposed to be Shangri-La. And if God was all good and all powerful, this world would be Shangri-La and everything would be served to us on a silver platter. And if it's not like that, we get bent out of shape because we have a preconceived notion that the nature of the world is it's meant for our enjoyment, that we're that special snowflake, and the world's meant for our enjoyment. And if God was all good and all powerful, he would make the world for our enjoyment. And if the world doesn't seem to be like that, then there must be something wrong with the Creator. And we're bent out of shape. Are you guys following my train of thought? Yes. How accurate is this? And when I'm saying how accurate is this, what you need to do is be woke enough that you can examine your own thoughts and your own world. How often do you live in a world where you think there's something wrong with the world because things aren't going your way? How often do you live in a world where you think there's something wrong with the world because you're not getting what you want? And you're pissed at the universe or the Creator or whatever, the architect ultimately. And you just feel like you're getting mistreated and you're not being done right and you've got your laundry list of things that just aren't fair that you don't feel good about. How often do you feel like that, Darshan? Right. And I'm quite certain that Darshan is more woke than most of you. And so if he's feeling like that a few times daily, I'm guessing you guys are more in the baker's dozen category. Where's the evidence that the world's supposed to be a place of enjoyment? What objective person observing the world would say, oh, this world's made for hedonic, you know what I mean, purposes? You look at the animal kingdom, you look at the plant kingdom, you look at the world, things are suffering, they're dying, they're reproducing. It's the hard struggle for existence. The elements of the world are acting against you. You have to search for food, shelter, water, and in the case of human beings, clothing. Old age is beating down on you. Gravity is beating down on you. Other people are beating down on you. Your body revolts on you at a certain point. It's called old age. You got to watch out for other people too. They can jack you up. Got lust, anger, and greed. They help you make poor decisions. There's all sorts of stuff out there that you can grab a hold of and ingest that ends up being bad for you. What logical person would look at this place and say, oh yeah, this was meant to be Shangri-La. God just isn't that tight, and so he messed it up. A much more reasonable take on the world is this place is meant for criminals. But everybody in prison is innocent. Nobody's ever in prison being like, I did it, man. I'm guilty. They got me right. Dead to rights. You know, I'm looking at him. He spent 12 years at Supermax. How many people in prison are whining about how they got a raw deal? Right? A lot. He was in Supermax too. And so how many murderers and rapists get a little tougher time in prison, but how many people who are guilty of violent crimes are whining about how they got done bad, they got done dirty?
Probably 9 out of 10.
Every once in a while you meet that guy and it's like, I'm where I should be. Yeah, I did it. I shanked that fool in the neck, watched him bleed out. And you're like, okay, that dude I'm scared about because he's really objective about the whole thing. He's really honest. That dude's a sociopath. I got to be careful around that guy. When you meet all the people who are lying, telling you they didn't do it and it's everybody else's fault, you're like, okay, I can hang with these people. They're kind of like me. But when you meet that one person who looks you dead in the eye and tells you they got exactly what they deserve, that's the guy you're most scared of, right? Right. He's like the shot caller. You know what I mean? So, I think we should reframe the way we look at the world. I think we should look at the world that we're criminals, that we're lame, that we're children, that we're mean girls, that we're like terrible, like we're in our terrible twos. We got some lessons to learn. We got to learn how to play nicely with other people. And we should expect our fair share of knocks while we're here. That should be our mindset. Of course, if that's your mindset, it's way more realistic. It also makes you a fair bit more stoic. You'll be a heck of a lot less disappointed in life. I also don't think spiritual life is easy. I think spiritual life is difficult. I think celibacy is difficult. I think sobriety is difficult. I don't think being a vegan is difficult, but some people do, and I remember when I thought it was. I think praying for 2 hours a day is difficult. I think having integrity is difficult. I think living with honor is difficult. I think establishing a moral compass and then living by it is difficult. I think being fair across the board, or even better, fair with yourself and merciful to others is difficult. I think there's a reason why it's a road less traveled and it's the razor's edge. I think there's a reason why it's spoken of in such language. And I think people who practice spiritual life should expect things to be difficult. I think just living in this world, you should expect things to be difficult. And if you don't, you're an idiot. You haven't looked at the world properly. You're a child who lives in a little magic world that doesn't correspond to reality. And I think doubly so, when you pick up the torch to practice spiritual life, you should expect it's not going to be easy. And I think you should saddle up and strap in and steel yourself. And there's a verse from Krishna I wanted to read. Vishaya vinivartante nir ahar asya dehina. Dehina. For the person in a body. Deha means body. Dehi means the one who has a body. It's like yoga and yogi. Deha, dehi. Dehinaha. For the person who's in a body. Nir aharasya. Ahar means to eat. Nir aharasya. Nir means to not do. So to not eat. Nir aharasya. By not eating. By fasting. But the tongue is, in a lot of ways, a lot of times in Sanskrit, you'll mention the first thing in a category and it'll speak for the whole category. So when you say eating, usually you mean eating which taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound. And the tongue actually acts on the world through speech as well as takes stuff in through food. So it's a double sense. It both acts on the world through speech and it also takes stuff in. So anyway, through fasting, but what they really mean when they say through fasting is they mean through restraint. Contextually in the verse, if you look at the verse, the idea of fasting isn't just for fasting, it's for anything that you would ingest with your senses. Things you see, hear, and smell, and taste. You're taking them in, you're consuming them, you're enjoying them. And so nirahara sadhana. You got a body, you can fast. Vishaya vinivartante. And you can turn away from sensual pursuits. Through fasting, you can turn away from from sensual pursuits. Tomorrow's a fasting day. Tomorrow is Ram Navami. And I believe we end up fasting until moonrise. I think one time you're not supposed to fast till moonrise on Ram Navami. You're supposed to fast till noon. But there's a conversation with Srila Prabhupada where somebody said, they were talking about how long to fast till, and somebody said sunset, and somebody else said moonrise, and Prabhupada said authorized. Like a rhyme with moonrise, he said authorized, and then from that time on, now we all got to fast till moonrise on Ram Navami, because he never said, oh, I looked at the Punjika and it's actually only noon. So everybody else, all of our other Gaudiya brethren fast till noon, but us ISKCON devotees, followers of Prabhupada, end up having to fast till moonrise. And every year I'm like, I'm just going to fast till noon this year. But then I start to feel guilty and I end up fasting till moonrise, which sucks. It's easy to fast till noon. Fast until the moon comes up sucks. And because somehow all of our moonrise fast days, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the moon rises 1 hour later every day and then 1 hour earlier every day. So there is a couple of days a month where the moon is rising at 10 a.m., 9 a.m., 8 a.m. Did you guys know that? Look up your moonrise. It changes 1 hour every day. As the moon gets more full, then the moon rises at earlier and earlier times. And as it wanes, it rises at later and later times. And so, of course, all of our moonrise fast days are never on the days when the moon's rising at like 10 a.m. It's always when the moon's rising at 7 or 8 p.m. So it sucks every time. Anyway, I digress. So we're going to fast tomorrow, and I'm already bummed about it. Like, I'm already bummed about it. Like, I probably thought about it half a dozen times today. Because fasting is tough. And so then there's also the, like, do I fast from food and water? Our real fast is you fast from water. Then it gets real tough. Then you're dehydrated and you're hypoglycemic by the time the moonrise comes up. And you get a chance to, really perform some austerity. Voluntarily undergo some difficulty for the sake of spiritual advancement. So, I think most of us are like children, and we blame Krishna for stubbing our toe when it's clearly our fault. And if you had employees like that in your business, you would be so sick of them. Lucky Krishna's all good and merciful. He tolerates us. And the first thing we need to do when we grow up is we need to start taking responsibility for our mistakes. And then you got to get to where you can own it all. And that either comes through theism or through looking at the cause and effect of the world. They're both ways. I prefer the theistic route. I think it's a stronger argument. A little more laborious, but I think once you make it, it's stronger. And now you start to own that everything that's happened to you is your fault. And alongside that, we should embrace the notion that this world is a prison. Not in some sort of Judeo-Christian, Islamic, the world's bad, evil, God's evil, but in the sense of we have something to learn and we came here to learn something. And if you look at the world, it does seem like the world's made to teach you some lessons. There's a lot of rules in place. Law of gravity, there's all sorts of rules in place. It seems like it's meant to teach you some lessons. And certainly most of us have lessons to learn. And it seems like the world, by its very design, is meant to teach us some lessons. And by embracing the notion the world's a prison, all of a sudden you don't hate the architect and think he's terrible and needs to go back to architecture school. You realize, oh, he made the place just like it's supposed to be. And then we can be that one gangster who actually admits, I'm here because I deserve to be here. And then a corollary notion, I think that has a lot of value, is embracing the idea that spiritual life is difficult. It's work. It's hard work. Stuff we give up is hard work. Stuff we do is hard work. Just like if you go to law school and you're like, this is going to be great. No, it's not. It's going to suck. Or you go to medical school And you're like, this is going to be so much fun. It's not going to be fun. It's going to suck. You're going to be working 70, 80 hours a week. It's not going to be fun. You got to embrace the suck and realize that I'm doing this because I believe in what I'm doing, not because it's easy. And if you start to think I'm doing this because it's easy and it's fun, you're not going to long endure. And so by challenging the myth, the enduring myth, that this world is supposed to be Shangri-La, that the bars on the cell are not an indication that there's a bad architect, that stubbing my toe is somebody else's fault. And we need to challenge that myth, because by challenging that myth and starting to practice some kind of radical ownership that is a reasonable and it's a philosophically astute position, by doing that, you can then steel yourself for what lies before you, which is a long life of austerities if you want to see God. And you can prep yourself for the hard work, for the sweat, for the blood, for the tears, for the anguish that will automatically accompany spiritual life. And Krishna makes a brilliant argument. He says, Vishaya vinivartante nir aharasya dehina. The embodied soul can fast from sensual enjoyments and turn away from them. Rasavarjam, except for the taste. The taste for sensual enjoyments will remain. You cannot do it. But there's always going to be that little taste, that little appetite for destruction. You went and got addicted to sensual stuff, and now you're going to give it up, but you got addicted, and so it jacked with your brain chemistry, and it jacked with you, and it's going to be hard, and you're going to sometimes feel a temptation. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That's the price of admission. Rasa varjam, except for the taste. That doesn't go away. Rasa varjam, rasa api asya, param drisva nivartante. But then, when you, having seen something higher, what Prabhupada translated as experiencing a higher taste, it's drishtva means having seen. Param, something higher. But having seen something higher, what do you have to give up? What does the verse say you have to give up? Huh? Yeah, you guys aren't following me. Maybe I didn't frame it right. The verse is about turning away from things which are bad for you generically, using the analogy of eating, but actually intending to explain you're supposed to turn away from things which are negative or bad for you in general, all sensual pursuits. But it uses the example of eating because the tongue is the primary sense in many cases. Sometimes hearing is the primary sense. So they'll say shravanadi or sparshadi, means touch, etc., or hearing, etc. In this case, they say you got to fast, etc., which means you got to fast and not look at stuff you shouldn't look at, not listen to stuff you shouldn't listen to, etc. But it uses the analogy of eating. So then when you eat, you stop eating bad stuff, right? But what doesn't go away? The taste, right? So then the Sanskrit says you got to see something higher. But the context of the verse is it's talking about flavor and taste and enjoyment, using really a metaphor of eating to refer to all sensual pursuits. Did you guys follow this? This is like just a little, slight, tiny bit intermediate level. So if you're half listening, you wouldn't get it. If you're listening, you should have gotten it. Krishna says you can fast, but does he mean you can fast, or does he mean something else? What does he mean? Huh? He means you control your senses and restrain yourself. Good. So he says you can fast, but what he really means you can control your senses, right? Okay. And he says something's going to stay with you. Using the analogy of eating. What's going to stay even though you've fasted? What's going to stay? The taste, right? But then the taste will eventually go away. And the taste will go away when you've seen something else. But when you've seen something else that makes the taste go away, what will you have done? You'll have tasted something higher. And therefore proper translates into English as when you receive a higher taste. It's actually when you've had a higher vision, is what the Sanskrit says. But in the context of the verse, with this elaborate metaphor of taste and flavor and enjoyment and eating, then Prabhupada translates it in the context of the analogy being given, or where taste is standing in for all the senses, and Prabhupada says, experiencing a higher taste. Seeing something higher, then rasa api, even the taste goes. Nivartante, even you can turn away from that. And so what happens in life is you start off and, people want to eat seafood. They're talking about eating shrimp or some shit like that. Excuse me. Pardon my French. That's not the temple. It's our ashram. Get away with that. And so people want, they're having a hard time giving up eating meat. Like I have no desire to eat meat ever. I can't even sit next to somebody who's eating meat. When I'm on an airplane, somebody's eating meat next to me, if that ever happens, and I fight like hell to make that not happen, I'll get up and stand in the aisle. Or if I can't, because the whole plane's like totally full, I'll crouch over like this and put like a shutter over my head and get totally weird because I don't even want to I don't want to like see the person chowing down on flesh. And if I smell it too much, I'll vomit. Eventually the taste for the thing goes away. Till that time, you got to tolerate that taste, got to tolerate that itch. You got to saddle up and be prepared that the world of sensual enjoyment is antagonistic to deep spiritual realization. Because if you're so busy enjoying your body, how are you ever going to realize you're not your body? If you're enjoying your senses all the time, to really get into it, to really sink your way into enjoying your body, right? Then you got to start to think, I am my body, and this is really making me happy, and this is really what I'm about. And so the very nature of sense gratification, of enjoying your body, is it rivets you to your body and makes you fundamentally believe, I am my body. Even if intellectually you don't think you are, fundamentally you think you are, because you're using it as the vehicle for your enjoyment, and you're identifying with it as the most valuable thing you possess. Do you guys follow this? The very exercise of trying to experience something beyond your body involves devaluing some of your bodily pursuits, your bodily urges, your bodily necessities, and actually turning away from them. And so sense gratification, indulgence, sensuality is the natural antagonist of spiritual life, because it's hard to realize you're not the body when you're diving in. It's hard to get dry when you're diving in the water all the time. Hard to put the fire out when you're pouring gasoline on all the time. Hard to realize you're not the body when you're acting like you are the body. So we should saddle up and realize the world is a prison. We are prisoners. We can frame it a little nicely. We got to learn some things. And that's really what penitentiaries are. They're for people to be penitent, be thoughtful, regret their past mistakes, feel some remorse, so they can move forward in life and not be a recidivist. It's funny, the term recidivist is not used very often in the outside world. But in the prison system, everybody knows what that term means.
Everybody thinks they're smart because they can say it. Recidivism.
It's a big word. It's not a word which is commonly used outside of that context. We should embrace the idea that this world is a prison, that we are prisoners, that we got some lessons to learn. Once you embrace that idea, all of a sudden the world makes a heck of a lot more sense. You start to appreciate what a great architect Krishna actually is. We should stop being lousy employees in the business of life. We start at least taking ownership of the things we do wrong. At least we should do that. You want to bump it up a notch and get a little more fancy, then you can start to extrapolate and realize, a lot of the things happening to you, even if you can't trace out the exact cause, you can appreciate that those things are also your fault. And then we can embrace the corollary notion, which is that spiritual life is difficult, and it involves fasting, and it involves restraint, and it's hard. And part of that austerity is you got to white knuckle it for a hot minute, and then the taste, even when you can handle your business, the taste will still be there, and it'll irk you a little bit. And you got to just learn to tolerate it and not act on it. Got to connect with your higher values on the daily. Initially, your higher values, your tribe, the people who depend on you, your value system, your elders, your juniors even who depend on you to be good so that you can teach them and guide them, your elders whose footsteps you want to follow in, your peers who are saddling up and riding into battle alongside you, and so you fight with them. Initially, your tribe, your value system, you connect with that, and that's the higher taste. It doesn't endure quite as deeply, but it does keep you strong if you tap into it every single day. And so a strong tribe, a fellow spiritualist, a strong tribe of people who have the same value system you do, who are walking that same talk, and who are walking the razor's edge, and who are living, a life of purpose, a life of value. Those people will give you strength and help you to tolerate the taste. And then eventually, and the higher taste is that value system, that code, that aspiration, that ideal that you strive for. Then eventually you begin to experience that ideal, and then the taste begins to dissipate. And even the taste begins to go away. This kind of mindset, this master's mindset, this journeyman's mindset, not the dabbler's mindset, steels you for what lies ahead, and it gives you the highest probability of success with the least amount of scrapes and bruises. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful class. I learned a lot. One thing that
I came up with this on the fly. Had no idea what I was going to talk about when I sat down. Anyway, go ahead.
one thing that I thought was very resonating was that even though theoretically we might think that we're not the body, but it's based on how we act in this world. We're acting based on sense gratification. That's what we're doing.
I mean, if you think you're not a drug addict and you take drugs all the time, you're a drug addict.
Yeah.
Your behavior also defines you, not just your thoughts. And so when you're acting like a materialist, you're not going to be able to fully embrace being a spiritualist. And that's why physical austerity and some restriction in life and some restraint has to go alongside your spiritual practice. There's things you got to give up, things you got to do. Your negatives and your positives. Your do's and your do-nots. Your rules and regulations. Your yamas and your niyamas. Your vidhis and your nishedas. That's Vedic language. Yama niyamas from the yoga language. But from the Vedic language, it's vidhi nisheda. And so there's always that rule and regulation, what you do, what you don't do. And so in every language they have these types of terminologies because they are required to really make progress in anything. And so those negative injunctions, the things you give up, are also important. Of course, you just give them up without doing anything positive. You're just like a guy sitting in a prison cell who's an atheist and materialist, and, drug addict, dreaming about using drugs and dreaming about all sorts of terrible stuff. He's in a cell with a straitjacket on. As soon as he takes the straitjacket off and let him out of the cell, he's going to go back to his nonsense. So just the regulations without the positive aspects does not create the spiritualist. Otherwise, all small children will be spiritualists. You follow? And so there has to be that positive element, but we shouldn't devalue the regulation. It also helps us. More. Yeah.
Thank you for this class. It leads me thinking about, we're in your life, and
Yeah, so the big yes initially is your community and your value system. The big yes becomes Krishna's name and the deities. And then that big yes becomes, the Lord of your heart. And so there's levels. Really, you realize the name and the deity are the Lord of your heart. And so it's not that they're just a totally different thing. But there's an attachment to your spiritual practice, which is intermediate. It's between attachment to a value system and just learning the rough movements of following the rules. And it's painful and it's difficult and you're just learning the basics. Then eventually you become attached and you enjoy chanting Hare Krishna. You enjoy it. It's enjoyable. You wouldn't trade it for the world. And then eventually you enjoy Krishna, who is the person you connect with when you chant Hare Krishna. And so those 3 steps, and those are the big yes. My people, my value system, my community, my ideal that I've embraced, and then that becomes my spiritual practice, which transports me, and eventually that becomes Krishna, who I am transported to through my spiritual practice. Yeah. I thought you had your hand up.
Yeah. I really appreciate the class because I think there's just an immense amount of value in somebody kind of giving you like what you're stepping into. Like a boxer or an athlete, they'll say, "Oh, this is going to be the tendency of your opponent, and when this happens, like, bro, this strategy, you're going to have to respond like this. It's going to be really difficult. You got to stick it through." Just know that eventually they're going to get tired, even though they might score 50 points on you in the beginning. And so being able to see that from our saints when they say, "Yeah, you're an ocean of sheer misery." It's like sometimes we forget.
Also, the whole ocean of misery, ocean of suffering, Material World's a prison house, it gets real Christian. And it gets into this, you're evil, everybody's evil, there's a devil. Even Denzel Washington was talking to Will Smith. So Will Smith committed assault on stage, did it in public. Smacked poor Chris Rock. Super bad punch. I don't know if you watched it, but Will Smith's up on his tiptoes when he punches him. Didn't sit down his punch at all. Didn't look like Muhammad Ali. He played Ali. Did not look like Muhammad Ali. Chris Rock, who seems like a small wind will blow that guy over, didn't even flinch. Didn't drop him or anything. He wasn't crying. He wasn't beat up. He wasn't even shook. He was still cool, And so if you look at the way, it's terrible mechanics. Anyway. But, then Denzel Washington went over to what is it? Huh? What? What's the word?
I remember he said
No, but he went over to what's the word I was looking for? Huh?
Will Smith.
No. Oh my God! Everybody, shut up, please. Shut up.
I know what you're talking about.
No, just everybody, shut up. Just everybody, shut up. That's please, pretty please. Sugar on top. He went over to sympathize with, cajole. I was looking for a verb. Commiserate with. And all you people are doing all sorts of weird stuff. I was just looking for the right word, and I got a good vocabulary. So it's commiserate with, but that's not right. Sympathize with, but that's not right. Show compassion to, yeah, but that's not the exact term I was looking for. Cajole, that's not easy. He went over to soothe. He went over to soothe and reassure and see. I got all sorts of words. None of them is quite the word I want to use. But he went over to what? He went over to.
Chastise.
Huh?
Chastise.
No, I didn't chastise. What? Console. Cha-ching. That's the word I wanted. He went over to console Will Smith. Why wasn't everybody run up to console Chris Rock? He just got slapped. I was oh, well, she had alopecia. But, how? I didn't know she had alopecia. I guess Chris Rock just sitting around watching her, Jada Smith's, is that her name? Jada, whatever. All right. Jada Smith's. I don't know how to say her name. That's how on the loop I am. There you go. There it is. How is he supposed to shut that? He probably didn't even write that joke. He's probably just reading off a script. Probably reading off a teleprompter. He probably might not even practice it. Might have been on a teleprompter, and he was just that. That's how good he is. He's reading off a teleprompter. How did he know? And then Denzel Washington said, "Oh, that's when the devil comes for you, when you're on top of the world." How is the devil responsible for that? How disempowering is that? How childish is that, right? Like, even if there is a devil, what now? Like, every bad thing that happens is the devil's fault? You have no moral agency? You have no free will? It's like it's the devil made me do it. Of course, the devil was created by God. That makes God evil, but that's just like the whole thing doesn't work. The best of all, and all good God, who's all powerful, would create the best of all possible worlds. The best of all possible worlds wouldn't be a world where we were victimized by the devil at every moment and had no power to resist. But, so this whole idea of the world's a prison house, the devil, evil, inherent badness, immortal sin, it's all wrapped up. I want to sever the world is a prison house from all that stuff, because I don't believe in any of that stuff. I believe everybody's good, and we have a few lessons to learn. Just like I believe people in prison are good, and they have some lessons to learn. And so, just like my children are good, and they have some lessons to learn. I don't let my children just run around and do whatever they want. They'll kill themselves. I have to protect my kids from themselves for their own good, so they can learn some lessons. And so this idea, I think, is vital. And we just need to sever that idea from all the evangelical garbage that sometimes gets thrown together with it into a gumbo, And you need to separate it out. So this idea is great. Those other ideas maybe not so good. Does that make sense? One more. Yeah.
I like what you said about, it got me thinking when you said, like, even though we understand that we're in a place of learning or like a prison house, we still feel like a special snowflake, and we're like, why am I stubbing my toe? And we're like, want to do everything our way. And it just reminded me, like, when I first went in and I just wanted to go against the grain and do my thing, and I had to learn the hard way that there's a structure and then people have to show you the ropes.
When we can, IGTV, adios, but you guys can hear this one.